Last time, we gave the place the characters to call home. Tonight, we put that home in danger as we build our very first dungeon. Hey guys, it's Josh. Welcome back to Game Maker. Last time, we built a town. This town. If you're following along at home, you probably have a town of your own. But tonight, we're going to build a dungeon for our players to delve, and the hooks that we need to get them to go risk their lives in that dungeon. We're also going to take a look at the gamey bits of encounter design and campaign frameworks. To do that, we're going to flex those flowchart muscles, so keep that graph paper handy. I want to make a quick point about character, plot, and story. As Dungeon Masters, we don't write a story, we write a plot. The plot is the things that happen, and the story is how the characters navigate through that plot. So your players bring the characters, you bring the plot, and together you create the story, and that's the magic of role-playing games. So let's get started. By and large, we're building this campaign from the inside out, kind of like a RPG onion in that it will make you cry like a lovesick child whose father went away to the store for a pack of smokes 2 years ago, but you're pretty sure he'll be back any minute now, and maybe he left because you weren't a good enough child, and if only you would listen better. Right now, that's not right. We're going to grow from the inside out like an RPG tree, sprouting and blossoming as it reaches for the sky in beautiful splendor, to tower over the verdant forest like some paragon of nature. Yeah, that's better. However, we're going to set that aside for a moment and look at the big picture so you can understand where we're going and kind of how we'll get there. In Dungeons & Dragons, there are 4 general tiers of play as the characters advance. The capabilities of the characters grows pretty dramatically between tiers, so it's a good idea to understand them. During levels 1 and 2, they're kind of like tutorial levels where the characters are still learning how to be heroes. It's also the realm of kind of common folk who have had interesting lives. When the characters hit 3rd level, most classes get their signature abilities and they kind of come into their own. And during this time, characters are facing small local threats to like homes and villages. When the characters reach 5th level, they escalate pretty quickly. Casters get access to 3rd level spells and martial types start getting extra attacks. Between here and level 10, the experience cost to advance grows, so this is where they'll spend the bulk of their adventuring careers. During this time, the characters face larger threats, the kinds that threaten cities and whole kingdoms. When level 11 rolls around, the characters are pretty powerful. Casters have 6th level spells, and fighters are up to their eyeballs in stat boosts and bonus attacks, which is good because they're taking on threats to whole continents. By the time level 17 rolls around, the fate of the world hangs in the balance. We're going to keep these tiers in mind and build our campaign around them. But enough about the big picture. Let's talk adventures. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is designed around 3 pillars: role-playing, exploration, and combat. So as designers, we need to make sure that we touch on all of those. We also need to get a little gamey and keep in mind the rules for character advancement. By default, characters gain experience by overcoming obstacles, which usually means defeating monsters, but as Dungeon Masters we can choose to use the milestone method, where characters advance after doing a certain number of things, which isn't dissimilar to the heroic labors of Hercules. Hercules, Hercules, Hercules! Or you could just hand out levels to the characters as you see fit, which is what I like to do. But we're going to try to accommodate whatever method you prefer without getting too noodly. As we build the campaign, you also need to keep in mind what style of game you like running. If you and your players like a sandbox where the characters are free to roam wherever they like, then you'll approach some elements of the game differently than if you prefer a more linear style of structure. But again, we're going to try to accommodate both styles. Before we go any further, I need to say that anyone who tries to bring out the 3-act structure Joseph Campbell or Blake Snyder can just get out of here with that nonsense. I was a creative writing major, so trust me when I say that the collaborative process of story building in RPGs makes those methods utterly useless. So keep those models and checklists away from the table because those models are for story structure, and like I said, we're not doing story, we're doing plot. The first thing to think about when building an adventure is how much you're likely to get through in any given session. The gaming session is a good time frame to keep in mind when you're looking at story beats, so the game doesn't turn into a slog, where nothing new or interesting happens, or the players are bombarded with plot and they kind of get lost in the deluge. A typical gaming session of 3 or 4 hours allows a group to get through about 5 encounters. So that's where we're going to start. 5 encounters means 5 rooms in the dungeons. There's a whole philosophy about 5-room dungeons. I'll put some links in the description. Before we decide what's in each of those rooms, we need to get a little gamey and consider how much XP the party needs to advance to 2nd level. A typical party is between 3 and 5 players, so we'll build our adventures for 4 characters. Now, one character needs 300 XP to advance to 2nd level, so multiply by 4, and we know that we need to have at least 1200 XP worth of encounters in our adventure. It's usually a good idea to add a little extra in case your players skip an encounter, so we're going to add an extra 100 to be safe. There are a handful of different kinds of encounters. There are enemies, traps, and secrets are the most common ones. The players will usually approach these encounters by some combination of role-playing, combat, or skill use, such as disarming traps or sneaking past enemies. And each is equally valid, so try to keep these approaches in mind when you design your encounters. Combat encounters are the most fiddly part of running D&D, and there's no easy way to do it. It's more an art than a science, despite what the Dungeon Master's Guide says. The system presented in the book is kind of like fiddling with the sliders on a mixing board, where tweaking one part requires adjusting every other part. It's a fiddly mess, and it still doesn't quite work. It's easier to just look at the CR of the monster and decide if you think your PCs can handle it. The only thing to make sure that you keep in mind is action economy, which is just a fancy way of saying how many times one side of the combat gets to do something. The side with the higher number of actors has an advantage in combat, and it's not readily apparent to new DMs. Even a swarm of kobolds can take down a high-level fighter if they throw enough bodies at her. If you don't want to spend the time figuring it out right away, you can use something like Donjon or Goblinist to auto-generate your combat encounters. I'll put links in the description. So, now that we know what kinds of encounters and that we're working with 5 of them, we can make our first flowchart. Boom! We're on the middle part of that flowchart right now. When making an interesting dungeon, there are a few things that we need to think about. We need to think about the intended use of the place. So is it a tomb or a castle or just a cave? Basically, who built it and why? A good dungeon is almost never still being used for its original purpose, though sometimes it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. What's its purpose now? Is it a monster lair or just some dusty abandoned ruin? On a hill outside the town of Hayford, locals discovered a source of amethyst. For several years, they burrowed into the hillside, pulling the precious stones from the rock. When the lode ran dry, the cave was abandoned, and is now little more than a local curiosity. Children explore its depths and dare each other to spend the night in the darkness. In recent days, however, a war band of kobolds have set up camp in the cave to use as a fortified staging area for an attack on the town. Now, if we read the description of kobolds in the monster manual, we learn that they're lawful and they work well in packs. So the characters are going to face organized resistance when they arrive. Kobolds are also crafty, so there'll be traps and secrets for the players to discover. Outside the cave is a clearing, where the traders used to load the precious rocks on carts to bring back to town. A shack near the entrance has fallen to debris, and a group of kobolds linger, guarding the entrance, nervous about any resistance from the town. If faced with any organized force from the PCs, they will ring bells and fall back into the cave. At the entrance to the cave, the kobolds have rigged up a trap. A vine tripwire has been pulled across the opening and rigged to release a row of spikes on unsuspecting passers-by. The entire warband of kobolds knows the trap is there and easily hop over the vine when they pass through. Inside the cave is the chamber where the rocks were cleaned and prepared before being brought outside. When the mine was abandoned, the locals left the tables and bins they used. The kobolds have since used these scraps as defensive barriers to make their camp here. At any given time, half the warband is awake and ready in case the alarm is raised outside. If the alarm is raised, then of course all of them are awake. Beyond the workroom is the chamber cleared as the amethyst lode was mined. This warren-like chamber has been put to use by leaders Brachus and Gracchus, a dragon shield and scale sorcerer respectively, kind of as a place to rest and plan. The kobolds have hidden their treasure behind a false wall they erected. They nervously wait further instructions from their enigmatic boss, Nalthar. After a few days of waiting, they will return to Nalthar with their loot. In preparation for the theft, the kobolds erected a false wall of painted canvas to block off an antechamber of the load room. It's in here they've hidden the dragon bones that they stole as treasure, as well as the treasure they received to undertake this theft. So with the flowchart and room descriptions done, the map part is easy. So we have a dungeon, but now we need to find a way to get our PCs to want to go explore it. This is the plot part of the flowchart, the bits before and after the dungeon. Characters need some kind of motivation to inform why they'd want to go risk their lives in the dungeon. There are lots of tools that you as the DM can employ to plant these hooks to get your players invested. The most old school of motivations is what I call because adventure. The characters have come to town, they hear about a place nearby. They decide to go explore it for no other reason than it's there. The characters are adventurers, and there's adventure in them thar hills. Modern gamers, however, like to have a bit more reason. Reasons could be a mystery is afoot and all the clues point to the dungeon, or some threat hangs over the town. There are goblins in the nearby watchtower, and if they aren't dealt with, they'll attack the town. The one we'll be using is a little combination of the above, but mostly the MacGuffin. There's something in the dungeon, and the party must retrieve it. This could be a kidnapped local, or some magical artifact, or perhaps a magical person. The choice is yours. If you choose to start your game with a combat, the characters are likely going to linger around town and recover before heading out to the dungeon, so it's okay to press them a little hard at this point, but they're first level, so don't press them too hard. Once the characters have solved the mystery, eliminated the threat, or rescued the magical Mr. MacGuffin, they return to town. But things are different now. They've undertaken some kind of adventure and done some kind of service for the town. So think on what you know about the town and how the locals may react to this. This usually shows itself as the characters having gained kind of a reputation as heroes, and there are a lot of perks that come along with being local celebrities. Take your time with this part. Let the players enjoy being heroes for a little while. So, being heroes is nice and all, but what about the other big motivator? Treasure, loot, goodies. The Dungeon Master's Guide has tables to help inform how much treasure to hand out, and we're going to be using them, but really the amount of loot that you hand out's up to you. 5th edition isn't like earlier ones where you needed to conform to a strict wealth by level, or the assumed power level of the characters was thrown wildly off. Until you get used to handing out treasure, I recommend just using the tables in the DMG. But then, there's the other reward, experience points. You just add up the XP value of each monster the characters fought, plus any that you decided to assign to other challenges, like traps or plot goals, then divide it by the number of characters and assign it. If you're using milestone XP, this is where the party will advance from 1st to 2nd level, which, if you use the milestone or handout levels, it frees you up from conforming to an XP budget. But what about Hayford? Well, every spring they celebrate the Maple Day Festival, a time after the sap has started to flow and the locals have cooked up all manner of maple sugar delights. Townsfolk and those from afar gather on the green and surrounding areas for games and festivities. The characters are in town to celebrate. For the kobolds in the Amethyst Mine, this festival is the perfect distraction to enact their goal, a daring theft of the dragon bones on display in the town hall. The theft goes mostly according to plan until the group of local children, off to play near the schoolhouse, stumble upon the kobolds as they slip out a window. The children scream in panic and flee towards the green. A group of kobolds give chase while the others escape with the bones. The kobolds realize only too late that they have chased the children right into the heart of the festival, almost to the feet of the PCs, who will assuredly defend themselves when the kobolds press their luck and attack. Upon dispatching the kobolds, if the party decides to spend a little time in town talking to the locals, they'll learn that the bones acted as a magical focus that kept the town safe from wandering monsters. Locals will also likely point out that the kobolds approach from the direction of the old Amethyst Mine, which makes for a logical place to start their search. When the kobolds have been dispatched and the dragon bones recovered, the characters are revered as heroes, and the townies will clap them on the back and offer to buy them mead. They'll even be offered discounts at the local shops. Even Lady Kendra makes a special point to thank them. This treatment lasts for a little while before things start to settle back to normal. It's entirely likely the characters have recovered intelligence from the dungeon as well, hints of a greater threat. The kobolds were sent by the mysterious figure Nalthar, who lairs somewhere in the local wilderness and gathers an army of dragonkin. So now we have a dungeon and reasons for the players to care about sending their characters into it. You can check out the one I made by clicking the link in the description. With a first adventure under our belts, we're going to head farther afield next time when we build that other most common of adventuring environments, the wilderness. I'll see you next time.
Oh, Hercules, Hercules, Hercules!